It's almost laughable now looking back on how it all started. I used to think of Louise as the love of my life, my better half, my soulmate. I know how cliche that sounds, but back then it felt real. We met during our second year at university, your typical boy meets girl story. She was studying literature, which was fitting because she always knew how to make a scene, while I was slaving away in engineering classes. We clicked almost instantly, and from then on, we were inseparable. Louise wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. Dark hair that always smelled like vanilla, a laugh that could fill a room. It felt like the world revolved around her. I loved that about her, or at least I thought I did. I was naive, caught up in this fantasy of what love is supposed to be. We went through all the motions, late-night talks about our dreams, fights over nothing that somehow felt like the end of the world, and of course, that first time we slept together. It was clumsy and awkward, but it felt like magic. Looking back, that's probably when I first convinced myself that Louise was the one. I mean, when you're young, everything feels like it's part of some grand romantic story. Our wedding was exactly how she wanted it. By the sea in Cornwall, with this picturesque setting like it was a damn movie scene. We said our vows while the waves crashed in the background, like a metaphor for how our marriage was going to end up. It felt perfect back then. And the honeymoon? Yeah, I thought that would be the start of our forever. I never realized that forever could have a deadline. Fast forward a few years, and life became that same dull routine you always hear about. Work, dinners at home, the occasional night out. I got a job as a project manager. She started working at a local gallery. We settled into this comfortable, predictable life. Or at least I thought it was comfortable. In hindsight, maybe it was just boring. And that's the thing no one tells you. When you're coasting on the idea of what marriage should be, it's easy to ignore what it really is. Then came that night at the club, the night everything spiraled. I didn't go out often, not since we gotten married, but my buddies Ben and Leo practically dragged me out. Ben's always been the wild one, the kind of guy who somehow knows all the bouncers by name, and Leo, he's the quiet type, the kind of guy who's down for anything, but rarely initiates. I remember stepping into that place, some godforsaken club in town with pounding music, neon lights, and the thick smell of booze and sweat in the air. It was like being yanked back into my university days, like I was 21 again and had no worries beyond what was happening in the moment. We started off slow, shots, then beers, then more shots. Before long, I was wasted, just like Ben always wants me to be. I remember feeling alive, like I'd been sleepwalking through life and was finally waking up. We were laughing at some drunken joke, maybe making fun of the DJ, who looked like he just rolled out of bed. For a while, it was just the three of us, a break from the monotony, from the pressures of work, of marriage, of being a goddamn adult. And then I saw her, Jenny. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was just a pretty girl on the dance floor, surrounded by her own crowd of friends. But every so often, her eyes would meet mine, and there was something in them, some sort of pull. I tried to ignore it, push it away. I mean, I'm married, right? But it was like the more I tried not to notice, the more I did. It felt like she was looking through me, like she could see something I didn't even know I was hiding. Ben, being Ben, nudged me in the ribs. "Mate, she's totally into you," he slurred, spilling half his drink. "Go talk to her." I laughed it off at first, shaking my head. But then there was this voice in my head, louder than it should have been, saying, "Why the hell not?" I'm not going to lie. I felt like a different person that night, like nothing mattered except right then and there. So I walked over. We started talking. Jenny, she was the exact opposite of Louise. Blonde, loud, and a little too forward, the kind of girl who knows she's hot and uses it like a weapon. And the craziest thing? She knew I was married. I don't even know how it came up, but I remember her touching the ring on my finger, a sly smile on her lips, and saying, "So, what's a married man like you doing out here without his wife?" I should have walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I laughed, and we kept talking, flirting, drinking. She'd touch my arm every now and then, leaning close so I could smell the tequila on her breath. And for the first time in years, I felt wanted. Not like how Louise wanted me to remember to take out the trash or be polite at dinner parties. I mean, wanted in a way that felt dangerous and new. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were pressed up against the bathroom door, the music muffled but still shaking the walls. I remember the feel of her hands on me, the taste of her lips, and that rush of adrenaline that made everything feel so surreal. Like I was outside myself, watching some other idiot throw his life away. It's not like in the movies, you know? There's no slow, romantic build-up. It was messy, frantic, like we were trying to prove something to the world, or maybe to ourselves. And all the while, that stupid voice in my head kept telling me that none of this mattered, that it was all just a game, just a fleeting moment of insanity. And then, just like that, it was over. We left that bathroom, went our separate ways, and I stumbled back to Ben and Leo like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I knew it the second I walked out of that club, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My head was spinning, partly from the alcohol, partly from the guilt. I remember Leo looking at me, a half smile on his face, and saying, "You good, mate?" And I lied. I said, "Yeah, I'm good." But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. And I couldn't take it back. That night should have just been a stupid mistake, something I could bury deep and never think about again. But mistakes have a way of catching up to you, and I had no idea how much that one night would destroy the life I thought I had. If only I'd known, maybe I would have made a different choice. Or maybe not. Hell, who am I kidding? Once you're on that path, there's no turning back. The days after the betrayal were pure hell. You know, when you do something so stupid, so monumentally wrong, that you spend every waking second trying to convince yourself it didn't really happen? Yeah, that was me. I thought I could just go back to life as normal, pretend like that night in the club was just some drunken hallucination, a glitch in the system that no one would ever know about. But secrets are like poison. They seep into everything, and before you know it, they've infected every part of your life. Louise didn't know, at least not at first. Or maybe she did. It's hard to tell with women. They always seem to have a sixth sense about these things. But I did my best to cover it up. I'd go to work, come home, try to play the part of the loving husband. And man, was that a struggle. Every word felt forced, like I was some actor trying to memorize lines from a shitty play. At dinner, she'd talk about her day at the gallery, some drama with a coworker or a new exhibit coming up, and I'd sit there, nodding along. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was terrified that if I looked her in the eyes, she'd see it. The guilt, the betrayal, the truth of what I'd done. The silences were the worst. Louise wasn't usually the silent type. She was more the kind who couldn't stop talking even if you wanted her to. But those silences at dinner, while we watched TV, or just lying in bed, they were deafening. I'd sit there, staring at my plate, and it felt like my guilt was written in bold letters all over my face. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't keep my story straight. One minute I was overcompensating, acting overly cheerful, making stupid jokes. The next minute I was snapping at her for no reason, my nerves fraying like old rope. And then there was the intimacy, or lack thereof. It's not like we had the best sex life to begin with. But now, God, it was like walking a tightrope. The last thing I wanted to do was touch her, but avoiding it just made things worse. Every night was a new excuse. Long day at work, not feeling well, maybe tomorrow. I could see it hurt her, the way she'd sigh and roll over, pulling the covers tight around herself. But I couldn't do it. Not with that weight on my chest, pressing down every time I so much as brushed against her. And at night, when she was finally asleep, that's when the panic would set in. My mind would spin, playing out every possible scenario of what would happen if I told her. Sometimes I'd picture her crying, devastated, screaming at me in shock. Sometimes I'd imagine her face going stone cold, icy, and just walking out, slamming the door behind her. There were times when I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd forgive me, that we could work through it like they do in all those rom-coms she loved to watch. But deep down, I knew better. I knew Louise, and I knew this would break her. But I couldn't keep it bottled up forever. The secret was like a living thing, clawing at my insides, demanding to be let out. I thought maybe talking to someone would help, take some of the pressure off. So one night, when Ben was off doing God knows what, I grabbed a couple of beers and met up with Leo. Leo's always been the listener, the guy who'll hear you out without passing judgment. We sat on this grimy old bench in the park, passing the beers back and forth, watching the cars go by. I wanted to tell him to just spill everything and let him carry some of this for me. But every time I opened my mouth, I choked. How do you say something like that out loud? How do you tell your mate that you just ruined your whole damn life in one stupid, reckless night? So I said nothing. I made some lame excuse about being stressed at work, and Leo just nodded, like he knew there was more, but wasn't going to push it. And that was it. I went home, sat in my car for a good half hour before walking through the front door, and felt more alone than ever. Days turned into weeks, and every minute was a ticking bomb. I could barely sleep. Every time Louise looked at me, it felt like she knew, like she could see right through me. I'd catch her staring sometimes, this strange look on her face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I couldn't stand it. I knew I had to tell her, but I kept putting it off, finding new excuses, thinking maybe I could somehow make it all go away. Then one night, it all came crashing down. We were sitting at the table, eating some bland chicken dish she'd made, and out of nowhere, she just says, "What's wrong with you lately?" I try to play dumb, like I didn't know what she meant. "Nothing, why?" I said, shoving another forkful into my mouth. "Don't give me that," she snapped, dropping her fork on her plate with a loud clatter. "You've been weird for weeks. What the hell is going on, Jack?" And there was my moment of truth. I could lie, could make up some story about work stress or whatever bullshit excuse I'd been leaning on. Or I could tell her. And for some reason, maybe it was the way she was looking at me, all angry and confused, or maybe I just couldn't take the weight anymore. I told her. I told her everything. "Louise, I slept with someone else," I said. It felt like the words were knives slicing my throat on the way out, but once they were out, there was no taking them back. The silence that followed was suffocating. At first, she just stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was joking. And then it hit her, the reality of it all. Her face twisted into something I'd never seen before. This blend of rage, pain, and disgust. And then she lost it. She threw her plate at me. Full on, like she was pitching in the World Series. The damn thing shattered against the wall, food splattering everywhere. "You piece of shit," she screamed. "You fucking coward. How could you?" Her voice broke, and I saw the tears welling up, but she quickly wiped them away, like she refused to let me see her cry. Was she worth it, huh? Some random slut? Was it worth ruining our marriage over one night? It wasn't like that, I swear. I tried to say, but she cut me off. "Oh, don't you dare. Don't you dare try to make this sound like it wasn't your fault," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "God, you're pathetic. You've always been pathetic. I can't believe I wasted my life on you." I tried to reach out to her, to say something, anything that would make it better, but she slapped my hand away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice ice cold. "Don't you fucking touch me. I can't even stand the sight of you right now." She stormed out of the room, and all I could do was sit there, staring at the mess around me. The shattered plate, the food smeared across the wall, and the gaping hole that used to be my marriage. And all I could think was, this is it. This is where everything ends. You think you know what pain is until you watch the person you love look at you like you're the worst thing that ever happened to them. And then, trust me, you realize you didn't know shit. Funny thing about betrayal. It makes you look back on every single moment and wonder how blind you really were. I used to think Tom was my best mate, someone I could trust like family. Turns out, you never really know people as well as you think you do. And you sure as hell don't know how low they'll go until you're the one staring up from the bottom. Tom and I go way back. He and his wife, Sarah, moved in next door not long after Louise and I bought our place. They were older than us by about 10 years, but they were down to earth, always ready for a chat over the fence or a beer in the garden. When Sarah left him about a year after they moved in, ran off with some guy from her work or something, I did what any good neighbor would do. I was there for him, invited him over, let him vent about the whole mess, even though most of it was just incoherent shouting and drunken rants. We bonded over it, like a twisted brotherhood of guys who had been screwed over by the world. From then on, Tom was part of our lives. He'd come over on Saturdays to help me fix things around the house, installing shelves, patching up the leaky roof, you name it. He was good with his hands, probably because he was always tinkering with something to take his mind off his own problems. Louise used to joke that he was more useful than I ever was, but I never took offense to that. Back then, I didn't think anything of it. We were just mates, helping each other out. And to be fair, Tom felt like a big brother to me, someone who had my back. Or at least, that's what I thought. It wasn't just the housework either. We'd barbecue together, especially during the summer. We'd get some beers, set up the grill, and he'd bring over those ridiculous spicy sausages he always liked, the kind that would burn your mouth out if you weren't careful. Louise loved those barbecues. She'd sit out on the porch with a glass of wine, watching us play around like kids, Tom and me tossing a football, making fun of each other, talking shit about whatever was on TV that week. I never felt anything weird about it back then. It was just normal. Too normal. But there were signs. There always are, I guess. Little moments that seemed off, but I brushed them aside. Like that one time when I came home from work earlier than usual and found Tom sitting at our kitchen table with Louise, a couple of cups of coffee in front of them. I remember walking in, feeling like I'd walked into the middle of a conversation that wasn't meant for me. Louise laughed it off, said Tom had just popped over to borrow some sugar or something, and then they just started talking about whatever small talk crap people use to fill the awkward silence. But the way they were sitting, close, like too close. And I remember Tom looking at me, this weird look on his face that I couldn't quite place. Like guilt or maybe surprise. I shrugged it off because why wouldn't I? They were friends, just like we all were. That's what I told myself, anyway. You don't see the cracks when you're not looking for them. And then there were the times Tom would swing by when I wasn't home. Louise always said he was just being neighborly, coming over to check on things or drop off something for me. And because I trusted him and trusted her, I didn't question it. Why would I? If my marriage was a sinking ship, I was the idiot captain steering it straight into the iceberg, all smiles and confidence. It wasn't just my gut that was picking up on things either. Mrs. Hudson, our other neighbor, well, she's one of those old women who know everything about everyone. A gossip with a mouth like a machine gun. She's lived on this street for 40-odd years, and if there's even the slightest hint of scandal, you bet she's right in the middle of it, dissecting every rumor like it's the gospel truth. I used to think she was just nosy, harmless, the kind of lady who'd spend her days peeking out of her curtains to see who's trimming their hedges wrong. One day, I was mowing the lawn, and she came waddling over, wearing her faded floral dress and a hat that looked like it belonged at a royal wedding. "Jack, dear," she said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet concern that only busybodies know how to muster. "I saw Tom over at your house again yesterday. Seems like he spends more time there than at his own home. Doesn't he?" I didn't think much of it then, just forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, well, we're close, you know. Mates. He's got no family around here, so..." She pursed her lips like she was trying to figure out how much she should say. "Well, you just make sure he's not getting too friendly with your Louise. It's not proper, a married woman spending so much time with another man. People talk, you know." I brushed her off. "Yeah, sure, Mrs. Hudson. Thanks for the heads up." And I went back to mowing, pretending like I couldn't hear her muttering under her breath as she tottered back to her house. People talk. What a load of crap. I mean, Tom and Louise were just friends. Hell, he was practically my brother. And Mrs. Hudson was just a bored old lady with nothing better to do than stir the pot. Or so I thought. But after that, I started noticing things. How Tom would linger a little too long when he came over. How he'd make jokes about marriage, ones that would hit a little too close to home, especially when he'd joke about poor Jack having to put up with the ball and chain. And Louise, she'd laugh. A little too hard, a little too long. And I'd laugh along too because it was all in good fun, right? Friends ribbing each other, like they always do. Then there was that night. Louise and I had been arguing, some stupid fight about the bills or groceries or something. I don't even remember now. She stormed off to the kitchen, and I sat on the couch, seething. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, it was late, and the house was dark except for the glow of the kitchen light. I got up to turn it off, but when I got to the door, I froze. Louise and Tom were sitting at the table, heads close together, whispering. Her hand was on his arm, and he was looking at her like I'd never seen before. I cleared my throat, loud enough to make my presence known, and they both jerked back, like kids caught sneaking candy. "Oh, hey babe," Louise said, all casual like she wasn't doing anything wrong. "Tom just stopped by to borrow a wrench." "At this hour?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, well, you know how it is," Tom chimed in, flashing me that friendly grin that suddenly felt like a mask. "Sorry, mate, didn't mean to wake you." I nodded, told him to let himself out when he was done. But that night, lying in bed next to Louise, my mind raced. I replayed every moment, every word, every look. And for the first time, the cracks in my life weren't just cracks. They were gaping holes, and I was too afraid to see what lay on the other side. Denial is a powerful thing. I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, that Mrs. Hudson was just trying to stir up drama. But somewhere deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. Because once you let that thought in, once you let yourself wonder if your best friend is screwing your wife, there's no going back. And the worst part? It was right there, all along, and I never saw it. Or maybe I just didn't want to. If there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's that rage has a way of creeping up on you. It's like this dark cloud, hovering just above your head, following you wherever you go. And once you let it take over, once you let that anger spill out, there's no putting it back. And that's exactly what happened with Tom. The weeks following my confrontation with Louise were tense, to put it mildly. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was nothing but snide remarks and bitter exchanges. The kind of words that stick to your skin like tar and don't wash off. I was sleeping on the couch most nights, both of us avoiding eye contact, tiptoeing around the reality of our broken marriage. But it wasn't just her I was avoiding. It was Tom, too. He'd stopped coming around, and that was fine by me. I didn't want to see his face, didn't want to confront whatever sick betrayal was lurking under the surface of his so-called friendship. But one day, it all boiled over. I came home from work to find Tom leaning against my front gate like he owned the place, casually lighting a cigarette like he didn't have a care in the world. The nerve of the bastard, to stand on my property like everything was normal. I felt this wave of fury crash over me. My vision went red. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I marched right up to him, my fists already clenched. "Jackie boy," he called out, a grin spreading across his face like we were long-lost brothers. "Long time no see. Thought I'd swing by for a chat." I wanted to break his goddamn teeth in right then and there. I could smell the arrogance on him, like he thought he'd gotten away with it, like I was still clueless. But I forced myself to play it cool, to hold back at least until I got some answers. "Chat about what?" I spat, trying to keep my voice steady. "You haven't been around in a while, Tom. Thought maybe you finally learned how to stay in your own lane." He blew out a slow, deliberate stream of smoke, making a show of it, like he was taunting me. "Come on, mate. Don't be like that. You know we're good, right? Just a little bump in the road. No hard feelings. No hard feelings." He said it so casually, so dismissively, like he wasn't talking about the fact that he'd been creeping around with my wife behind my back. I felt my nails dig into my palms, the blood rushing to my face. "What the hell are you talking about, Tom?" He gave me that same infuriating smile, the one that used to seem friendly, but now felt like a slap in the face. "Look, mate, whatever's going on between you and Louise, that's your business. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Life's too short for grudges." That's when it hit me. He wasn't even denying it. He was just brushing it off, acting like it was some minor inconvenience, like I was overreacting to some playground scuffle. And that's when I lost it. Something inside me snapped, and before I knew it, I was in his face, shoving him backward into the gate. "What, you think this is a fucking joke?" I snarled, my voice rising, barely able to contain the rage boiling over. "You think you can waltz over here and act like we're mates after what you did? You've been screwing my wife, you piece of shit." Tom's eyes went wide for a second. Shock, maybe, or just realizing that he wasn't going to talk his way out of this one. He tried to push back, but I was already on him. My fist connected with his jaw, and the crack of bone on bone reverberated in my head like a gunshot. I don't know how long it went on. It was a blur of fists and curses, a raw, animalistic rage that took over every muscle in my body. We were on the ground, rolling through the dirt and gravel, my fists pounding into his face, chest, anything I could hit. He tried to fight back at first, but I had the upper hand, all that pent-up anger giving me strength I didn't know I had. I could feel the skin on my knuckles split open, but I didn't care. All I could see was red, Tom's blood, my own, and the blinding fury that had finally found a way out. At some point, Tom started begging. "Jack, please, just stop, man, stop," he choked out between blows, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm fucking sorry." But his apologies only made it worse. I hit him harder, each punch fueled by all the nights I'd spent lying awake, replaying every touch, every laugh between him and Louise. "You don't get to be sorry," I screamed, my voice hoarse with rage. "You ruined my life, you bastard." Eventually, I felt arms around me, dragging me back, pulling me away. I don't even know who it was, maybe one of the neighbors, or maybe Louise herself. But they managed to pry me off him, and I stumbled back, gasping for breath, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Tom was a mess, lying on the ground, blood pouring from his nose and mouth, his face swollen and bruised. He didn't look like the smug bastard I'd come to hate. He just looked pathetic. I didn't say another word. I just walked away, stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind me so hard it rattled the walls. And that's when I found Louise, standing there in the middle of the living room, pale as a ghost, her eyes wide with fear and shock. "What the hell did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't even look at her. I did what I should have done a long time ago. We stood there in silence for what felt like forever, the tension so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Tell me the truth, Louise," I demanded, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on? How long have you and Tom been?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt like poison in my mouth. She looked away, crossing her arms over her chest like she was trying to shield herself from me. "Does it matter?" she said, her voice cold and motionless. "It's not like we've been a real couple for ages. You know that. Don't act like this is all my fault." Her words hit me like a slap. "Not all your fault? You cheated on me, Louise. You lied to me right to my face. And with him, of all people, my best mate." She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just stared at me with those icy blue eyes that used to make me fall in love and now only filled me with rage. "Yeah, I did," she said, her voice steady. "And you know why? Because our marriage was already dead, Jack. It's been dead for a long time. We just never admitted it." I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make her understand just how much she'd hurt me. But all I could do was stand there, shaking, the room spinning around me. "So that's it?" I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. You just gave up? Decided to have an affair because you were bored. She shook her head, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret. It wasn't about being bored, Jack. I was lonely. I was tired of feeling like I didn't matter to you, like I was just background noise in your life. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that I loved her more than anything. But part of me knew she was right. Maybe I had taken her for granted. Maybe I'd let the spark go out without even realizing it. But that didn't excuse what she did. It didn't make it right. I didn't deserve this. I said finally, my voice cracking. I didn't deserve to be lied to be betrayed by you, and by Tom. She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. And in that moment, I realized there was nothing left to say. The marriage we'd built, the life we'd shared, it was all gone. All that was left was the wreckage. And now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. Alone. Part 5. Divorce and Finding Oneself. If you've never been through a divorce, consider yourself lucky. It's a war zone. Only there aren't any rules, and there sure as hell aren't any winners. Right after everything blew up between me and Louise, reality came crashing down like a hammer. There were no more screaming fights in the living room. No more shattered plates or wild accusations. It was just paperwork, lawyers, and the slow, grinding process of tearing a life apart piece by piece. Louise didn't waste any time lawyering up. I remember waking up one morning to the sound of a stack of papers being dropped onto the kitchen counter. Divorce documents, full of legal jargon I didn't understand and demands that felt like a knife to the gut. She wanted everything, the house, the savings, even the damn car. I thought I'd be prepared for it. Thought I'd be able to handle whatever she threw at me. But there's something about seeing your whole life laid out on paper, reduced to assets and liabilities, that makes everything so much worse. We started with mediation. The idea was that we could sort things out like adults, sit in a room with our lawyers and split our lives down the middle. But it became clear pretty quickly that wasn't going to happen. Louise wasn't there to be reasonable. She was there to win. I could see it in the way she sat across from me, back straight, hands folded neatly on the table. She was cold, calculating like I was just another obstacle she had to overcome. And maybe I was. I knew she hated me. I could deal with that. But the greed, the sheer pettiness of it all, I didn't see that coming. Louise's lawyer, some prick in a fancy suit who probably made more in an hour than I did in a week, tried every trick in the book. She claimed I'd been emotionally abusive, that I'd neglected my marital duties, whatever that means. It was all bullshit, of course, but in a divorce, it's not about what's true. It's about who can make the other person look worse. And she was good at it. Damn good. Before long, I was fighting just to keep what little dignity I had left. The court hearings were a nightmare. I sat there in my cheapest suit, trying not to let my rage spill over, while Louise's lawyer painted me as some monster who'd ruined her life. And the worst part? Louise just sat there, nodding along, like she was some victim of a tragic love story gone wrong. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly how to twist the knife, to make sure I'd be left with nothing. I thought about fighting back, dragging her name through the mud, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. That's what she wanted, to drag me down to her level. And I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. It went on like that for months. Court dates, mediation sessions, more paperwork than I'd ever seen in my life. The whole process felt like slowly drowning. And every time I thought I'd found a lifeline, something to cling to, she'd yank it away. Louise fought for the house, our joint savings, even the goddamn dog. I didn't even care about the material stuff. Not really, but every demand felt like another stab, another reminder of what we'd lost. Then there were my parents. God, the look on their faces when I told them what was happening, when I told them why it was happening. My mom, bless her, didn't say much, just cried a lot and hugged me like I was still a kid who'd scraped his knee. My dad, on the other hand, was furious. Not at me, but at Louise. I remember him pacing back and forth in their living room, cursing under his breath, muttering about how that woman was going to pay for what she did to his son. But I didn't want that. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to move on, to forget that any of this ever happened. Some of my friends took my side, but others? Well, they stayed neutral. Said they didn't want to take sides, like it was some kind of football match, and they didn't want to pick a team. That hurt more than I expected. I guess I thought loyalty meant something. Turns out, when things get ugly, people look out for themselves. And fair enough, I get it. But it doesn't make it any easier when you realize how alone you are. There was one person who didn't let me wallow in self-pity, though. Harry, my old mate from university. He showed up one day, unannounced, dragged me out of the house, and practically forced me to do something, anything, to get my mind off the divorce. That's how I ended up taking up running. Well, taking up might be an exaggeration. It started with Harry shoving a pair of trainers into my hands and telling me to meet him at the park at 6 a.m. the next morning. I hated it at first, the cold, the early mornings, the way my lungs burned after 5 minutes. But it was better than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. Running led to other things. After a few weeks, Harry convinced me to try rock climbing. I remember staring up at the wall for the first time, thinking there was no way in hell I'd make it halfway up without falling flat on my ass. But something about the challenge, the focus it required, it felt good. For those brief moments, while I was concentrating on my next hold or how to keep my balance, I didn't think about Louise. I didn't think about Tom. I didn't think about the divorce or the mess my life had become. I just climbed, and that was enough. And slowly, painfully, things started to change. The anger didn't go away, not entirely, but it faded like the tide pulling back from the shore. I found myself looking forward to those early morning runs, the hours at the climbing gym. It felt like I was taking back some control, like I was rebuilding a part of myself that had been smashed to pieces. The legal battles dragged on, but eventually, we reached a settlement. Louise got the house, she could have it. I didn't want to be surrounded by memories of us anyway. We split the savings down the middle, and I kept my car. Fair enough. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. And once the papers were signed, once the ink dried on that final decree, I felt like I could breathe again, like I could finally start to move forward. For the first time in years, I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to explain myself, didn't have to make excuses. I was just me. And that was scary as hell. But it was also liberating. I started trying new things, joined a local hiking group, started going to yoga classes. Yeah, me and yoga, who'd have thought? And I even tried my hand at cooking. It was messy, and half the time the food came out tasting like cardboard, but it felt good to create something, even if it was just a half-burnt lasagna. People say time heals all wounds, and I used to think that was bullshit. But it's not about healing. It's about filling the space with something else until the wound doesn't feel so gaping, so raw. The divorce took its toll on me, that's for sure. But it also forced me to find myself, to figure out who I was outside of Jack and Louise. And for that, I'm oddly grateful. I never thought I'd be the type to say something like that. But there it is. Life's funny that way.